Are you or someone you know looking to buy or sell a home? When you use a HomeGain Realtor to buy or sell a home, you can get $150. Visit HomeGain.com and click on the Promo 150 banner at the top of the page to get started. Compare HomeGain Realtors and choose your favorite. Complete your home purchase or sale transaction with a HomeGain Realtor, and HomeGain will pay you $150. Get started today by going to HomeGain.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, joined today by my guest, Louis Cammarosano, the general manager of HomeGain. Quick reminder, Real Estate 360 is designed to build the Washington, D.C. Metro's housing and credit markets. If you ever have any questions, concerns, or real estate needs, the best number to reach out to us is 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Like I said, if it's, you're trying to get your credit fixed to be able to buy a home, whether you have, financing questions or real estate questions, contract questions, whatever it may be, if I don't have the answer, I'd be glad to pass you along to the professional that does, that can get you pointed in the right direction and in many cases get you, on the path to buying a home. We're coming back. Earlier I mentioned that we want to jump into the multiple offer situation. We talked about this maybe a couple shows back, Louis, about, the market is becoming very competitive, especially Northern Virginia metropolitan area, just because there's not enough inventory. And for good homes that are basically move-in condition, that are showing very well, there's multiple offers coming in on these properties. A lot of frustration is had by the buyers because they're missing out on, not one property, two or three or four. They're missing out, writing contracts on 5 to 10 properties and not able to get a deal to go through. It can be extremely frustrating. What I kind of wanted to do is maybe give you guys a few recommendations for some things that I tell my clients when you get into those situations, it's going to be competitive, of what you can do. The first thing that I always suggest is that, you put an earnest money deposit or you put a security deposit down on a property. Now, not always, but, sometimes the seller will really value the fact that you're willing to put up more of a security deposit. And if you've secured financing, if you've got a loan commitment from your lender or, maybe you're paying cash, whatever it may be, you might feel comfortable maybe even making your deposit a non-refundable if you don't close. These things can give great strength to a contract and maybe allow you to squeak in with somebody that doesn't have that maybe his offer is $5,000, $10,000 more than yours. You have to realize that the biggest thing in the seller's eyes is, in many of the listing agents are telling their clients that, it's all about getting the deal to close. So that's great that, somebody raised the price up $40,000, but they still have an appraisal contingency in there that it has to appraise, or they have the option to back out of the contract. I've seen this happen hundreds of times at this point where, it's a multiple contract situation and it gets bid up. Let's say the list price was $200,000. So there's multiple bids. It ends up going up to $230,000. They take the highest bid, but it has that appraisal contingency in there. That house doesn't end up appraising for $230,000. It appraises for $215,000. And all of a sudden, the deal is starting to fall apart because, they wanted to pay $230,000 and now it's $215,000. I'm not going to accept less than $230,000. Well, the lender's not going to lend on $230,000. They're only going to lend on what the appraised value is. So lo and behold, either they're going to lower their price down to that amount or they're going to walk away. And I always tell people, especially if I'm in a situation where I'm handling the seller, I always tell them that, if you strengthen the contract in other ways by putting larger security deposits, in some cases, if the people are really strong and they've already gotten a firm loan commitment from the lender and they can remove the financing contingency that's there because they know that their loan is already approved and ready to go. This all strengthens your ability to get a contract to go through. Now, many of you are probably saying, well, how come I wasn't told to do these certain things? And a lot of it has to do with, who you're working with. And there's little, not necessarily tricks or anything like that, but it's just things that you can do that the seller is going to say, wow, this person really wants the house if they're willing to put up, an extra $4,000 or $5,000 for security deposit and, removing or putting home inspection for informational purposes only, meaning that they can go in, you still get your home inspection. If you don't like the findings that were there on the potential report, then you could walk away. But it also gives the seller the right to say that they're not going to make any repairs on that property. So, Lewis, there's a lot of different options that people have out there. I think what happens is people get so caught up in the fact, this rat race that they're trying to get a property under contract, that their first thing that they always jump to is price. And price is important, but it's not always the main determinant of what contract gets selected. And good agents, good listing agents, will sniff out offers where they know that they're just trying to just raise the price up, knowing that it's not going to appraise anyway. So it's really important that you're working with an agent that can help you, consummate a deal. Because at the end of the
skill in that, you're absolutely right.
And there is a lot of skill in, and you know what? A lot of it has to do with, you need to know if you have some flexibility in that price. You need to know, where you might be able to make your offer a little bit better than somebody else's. And really what that comes down to is knowing the local market, knowing what's sold in there, so you can kind of gauge of what that property is going to appraise for. I mean, in certain instances, Lewis, in my personal business that I do, I'll tell somebody if I think a property is undervalued, because if I think it's undervalued and there's another good agent that's going in with me as well, she's probably going to be telling her clients the same thing. If I think that if it's listed at $250, but I think it's worth $300, I need to tell my client that, because in order to make a good offer, a solid offer that's going to help them get this home that they want to live in, sometimes it's not getting caught up in the fact that, hey, well, I don't want to pay $275,000 for that house. I always try to tell the clients that this is why you work the numbers up front and you figure out, what can you afford? What can you afford to pay? Because ultimately you want to live somewhere. You want a home that you can call it your own, do what you want to do with it. And with the financing costs so low right now, $10,000 to $20,000 really doesn't affect things. Now, it can obviously affect the transaction if the property wouldn't appraise. But it's good knowing all the what ifs going in before you write that contract. What I see a lot of agents do in their dealings is that they just don't explain all this stuff up front. So when an appraisal doesn't come in and if the transaction falls apart, it's the fact that the buyer didn't know that this was an issue that could come up.
Right.
I mean, it's good to always lay out what the worst case scenario is. Okay, well, what happens if my financing falls through? What happens if the home inspection goes bad? If you know all those things up front, then, when you do hit that stumbling block, because I'll tell you, Lewis, in the real estate game, there's always going to be a stumbling block almost 9 times out of 10. It could be really small. You know what I mean? It could be a really small stumbling block, but if you know that there is a potential for that up front, these transactions will go a lot smoother. And, you and I discussed this week after week that it really just boils down to working with a professional that knows the market.
And also, doesn't knowing professionals who know the market, who also know the other professionals, maybe on the other side, oftentimes the other side might slip and say there is a cash buyer or there are no cash buyers. And then that real estate agent can factor in that information that he's gained or she's gained as a result of constantly dealing with the other side. And also knowing if maybe they're bluffing because they've told that there's been a cash buyer in the past and there really wasn't.
Yeah, and that happens all day long, Lewis. You're right. And I think that there is a role. It's this untold thing that, if another agent has done a couple transactions with an agent and they've all gone smoothly, they've all closed on time, do you think that they're more likely to take their contract than an agent that they've never worked with?
Right.
That happens all day long.
And also take the information that they've given them at face value or discounted it because they've worked with them before and turned out that some of the things they said haven't been true.
Yeah, and, sometimes there is a bit of guesswork that comes into play here where you're trying to, figure out if they're just posturing to put you in a place where you got to make a tough decision. And, I always tell the people, I say, you got to make the offer with your head and your heart.
Right, I mean, your best realtor is going to more often than not make the right judgment call on those posturings.
Yeah, if I know that a client really wants a house, I'll typically tell them what it's going to take. Now, does that mean that it's always going to work out? No. But they at least know that, and they can still ultimately tell me what they want to go in at. I'm just using my best judgment from prior transactions, from what's sold on the market, what the market bears, and that's where sometimes I have to scale back expectations of buyers, and I have to tell them, hey, look, we're going to be very, very super competitive with multiple offers if we're going to look at all the properties that don't need any work, right? So we might need to go and look at something that might need, maybe a little bit of updating in the kitchen, maybe a little bit of updating in the bathrooms, because there's going to be less competition for those homes. And you don't get into a situation where you're having to bid up those properties. So you need to really, and that's the diamond in the rough, obviously, but those properties are out there, and there's creative financing like FHA 203K financing where you can get up to the streamline 203K. You can get up to $35,000 towards, repairs to spruce up the property, whether it may be new windows or carpet, redoing the kitchen and flooring. That can really, $35,000 on a lot of single family or townhomes can really turn that property around. Now, you have to have a vision for that, and you have to, be willing to wait maybe another 30 days to get the work done. But ultimately, that could help you get your contract accepted. I think that the biggest frustration that I'm seeing right now in my market is just that people are getting extremely frustrated. They think that they're never going to get a home. And I really don't see the inventory levels changing. I think that we're going to remain pretty tight. It looks like Riz Media had actually did a little survey with NAR and basically said that first-time homebuyers have accounted for 34% of the total buyers right now. Well, first-time homebuyers are the ones that would get frustrated the most because this is their first time dealing with the transaction. And if, like I mentioned before, if all the nitty-gritty details of the real estate transaction are not laid out in front of them when they start the transaction, they get nervous. They get antsy. They're not sure if they're making the right decision. They're not sure if the contract's structured properly. They're really depending upon a professional that can lead them down the path to get that deal to go through for them. So, like I said, the best advice is just to make sure that you're really doing your due diligence and research on who you're working with and, that they know the local markets and they can help you navigate the waters. 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. When we come back, Wells Fargo actually cut their wholesale mortgage lending platform, and I'll explain why when we come back. Stay right there.